Active duty service members, veterans, family members, thank you for your service. And thank you for listening to Return to Roots Mil2Vet Resource Podcast, where we document our shared experiences, stories, and transitioning and reintegrating from the military to the community. Hosted by two transitioning service members, myself, Chris Elder, and my partner in crime, Jonathan Hernandez. For more information, go to mil2vet.com. If you have little ears, ensure you listen to the content before you allow them to listen. And if you are in crisis and homelessness, suicide ideations, or incarceration, dial 211 Courage to Call for assistance. Now, stand by for the sound of freedom.
Return to Roots fam, welcome to the show. Today we will have a fantastic leader. She's a mother. She has raised two children, and she teaches us how to be resilient, resourceful by using our purple threads and identifying them. Her name is Abigail, and we cannot wait to talk about her. Welcome to the show, Abigail. Abigail, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate you guys.
So Abigail, let us know about a little bit about your story, right? I know that we're going to mention it, that you already had two kids that are serving in the Marine Corps.
Mhm.
And then you have as you mentioned, your other son, that is your daughter's significant other. But we want to hear what you've been doing at least for the last 6 years.
A lot of running around thinking my hair is on fire. And on those days I throw it in a ponytail. So I have taken a vision of something I really didn't understand since I was a little girl. At age 8, I stood in my bedroom mirror and I made a vow that the abuse I experienced at the hands of both of my parents, there's 5 different forms of childhood abuse, and I experienced 4 of the 5 through both of my parents. And it's taken a lifetime of manifesting that into curriculum, things I've learned in the trenches of life, things I've learned the hard way, things I've learned academically from college, like cognitive communication and behavioral studies and sciences, and what works and what doesn't, and lots of healing and therapy modalities. And I put it all in the blender and I came up with my own concoction and created artwork to go with it. And where I thought it was going to take me, it didn't go. It was closed doors all the time. And I thought, wow, these doors keep opening up. And to my surprise, it was military. It was military organizations and veteran groups. And I felt like I found my people. I felt like I found where I belong. I'm a very patriotic person. I'm 100% a civilian. I've never served. As you mentioned, my kids do and have. And it just seems like it's a natural fit. It's nice to be able to have kind of a snarky humor. And it's respected and liked and appreciated, and also absolute seriousness and serving others. That's the thing I find over and over. It's the serving of heart. As a kid growing up, I was very protective and providing for other people. And I find that's what people in the military do. So that's really what I'm focusing on now, is how to take my curriculum and help other people thrive.
You know, that is really awesome. And when you take the philosophy of to thrive is a choice and because of, but not in spite of, what obstacles and what things really work with that?
Yeah. One is no victim mentality, no victim thinking. And that's easy to do. So if you guys know about grooming or gaslighting, happens when you're older and adult and people try to make you feel crazy in order to manipulate you. Grooming happens when you're really little. And so that you believe that to be your truth. And that's what my curriculum about Purple Threads is like believing in your unworthiness. And so my goal is to help people recognize that and remove it and be able to empower themselves and make good choices. And when we know we have power and control to choose what path we want, not what path we were dumped on, not what path has happened to us, not what we've experienced, because we've all experienced. I've done this with thousands of people, my Purple Threads curriculum. Everybody has something, right? So we can choose to focus on that, and we can choose to be a victim, and we can choose to sit in the grief and the sorrow. Sitting in grief and sorrow is totally understandable. Totally understandable. Staying there for the rest of your life because you're helpless is not what helps people thrive. So I want to show people that you can thrive. You know, I don't wish what I've been through, including, you know, the child abuse, the domestic violence, the pit of PTS. I don't wish that on anybody, but I do know it made me a better person. I do know it made me stronger. I do know I had to dig deep. And I do know now I have people who come up to me all the time and say, I've never told anybody this. Or, you know, we're a lot more alike than you think. And that's what I love, is building those connections of unity where we can see ourselves in other people and we lift each other up. So that's why I say it's a choice. Now, is it easy? No, it is not easy, but it's absolutely doable.
You know, I want to talk about what you just said. It's okay to have that little moment where it's not necessarily a pity party, but sometimes it is a pity party. You know, we all have that moment where we get really disappointed or something happens like that. So you got to give yourself permission, a moment to have that. So you can you can reflect and you can digest what happened. So that way you could stand up later after digesting and reflecting and actually get out there and start kicking butt again.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Rest and digest, right? Central nervous system. So Purple Threads is tied to that. So a lot of times we react to a situation versus responding with power and control because we're not told the skill sets that we can do. We are brainwashed into thinking we're not smart enough, we're not good enough, we're not talented enough, we're not likable enough. I've always been a mess up. I've always been this or that. And we don't know that we can change that narrative. We don't know that. We don't know we can self-empower, remove those thoughts, neurologically stop the panic and the stress and that downward spiral that those create, and regain our power and control, regain our composure, regain new neural pathways that get damaged when there's stress and there's trauma or TBIs. And how do we do that? Like through new skill sets, right? And it's doable. So when we believe it's doable and we choose to thrive and we know we can make a difference and we don't quit until we find the right resources for ourselves, that's what I find super amazing and impactful in the work that we get to do.
Yes. Do you have any examples of your life where that you don't mind sharing about how you had a situation and you're like, you know what, I'm going to do this according to the Thrive philosophy?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I learned that a lot later in life on how to do it. And that's some of the things I wish I had known. Like, I didn't think I could raise the kids by myself. So when their dad, my husband, after 10 years walked out, took all the money and walked out. Let's throw that piece in there. Oh, and left lots of gambling debt that I didn't know about. We'll just throw those in there too. That I learned this choosing to thrive the hard way. I'm a protector and a provider, as I mentioned, and I was that growing up. And so it was a really easy hat for me to wear as a mom. Not a problem. We can do that. Of course we can. We've got this. So I taught my kids what I wish I had heard. I taught my kids what I wanted to believe in myself. I was worthy of love. I was worthy of respect. I was worthy of kindness. And then when the kids grew up and left home, shocker, I had to learn this more the hard way for myself. And so a lot of this is really authentic. And I think that's why people can connect, because they're like, I'm struggling with that. I'm like, it's okay if you're struggling with it. The key is now you recognize it and you can get the tools to replace it. So believing in yourself came to me very slowly over time, and really deeply believing in myself. I was always an overachiever, but it was never good enough. You know, it was a fluke. It was a one-time win. It was, well, the real competition didn't show up. I mean, no matter what I did and how high I went, it was never going to be good enough. So the battle for me is to decide what is good enough, right? And I learned the hard way how to keep fighting for that. And so that I learned, like doing triathlons, right? Like chasing down the people in front of me. And then it wasn't about them, it was about myself. And I'm like, oh, this was never really about the people around me. So to me, it was tiny little steps throughout my entire adult life where I learned how to recognize and undo purple threads. And what my goal is to help people do it faster. So like when I'm coaching someone, I'll say right there, like, hey, what is that connected to? I'm like, that's connected to you. And one person in particular, like I can use an example, is that they moved over here from a foreign country. And they said, as a very successful person, and they're like, I'm always behind. I'm like, are you truly always behind? Or is that a narrative you're telling yourself? Is that a tape that's ruminating in the back of your head? And so the more he talked to me, the more I was like, oh, did you speak English when you moved here? And he said, no. And I said, well, of course you were behind. You were in grade school and you were a little kid and everybody else is speeding ahead and you have no idea what they're even saying. Of course you still have that mindset. I'm behind, I'm behind, I'm behind. And the moment we said that, you could see the switch went on. And it's when, again, those, I wish I could have figured this out a long time ago.
So it's funny you mentioned that. For me, I was born and raised in Mexico City. I didn't move to the States until I was about 12 years old. And then, as you mentioned, I was playing catch up, right? My mom, she did the smartest thing that she could have done, and she put me 2 grades behind. Me being the overachiever that I always thought that I was, I undid her work whenever she went back to Mexico for a little while. See, my dad raised us for a little while. And then I could never understand for the longest time is why I always had that feeling, right? It took me about 10 years into the Navy to finally feel like I was no longer an imposter, like I could actually speak English, like I could actually move forward in life, and I was no longer holding anyone behind me. Had I felt or learned this, which what you're teaching, at a much younger age, it would have been, my self-confidence would have skyrocketed completely.
I
So
love
thank you for what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. In fact, in a Navy leadership class that I teach out in San Diego, I've heard that over and over. Why aren't we learning this in grade school? Why aren't we learning this earlier? Why aren't we understanding it? And just the mindset of when you're yogi, your mind was like, okay, I'm caught up. You started subconsciously looking around for confirmation of that. And when you have the victim mindset, like we were talking about before, you're looking for that. You're looking for where you're a victim. You're looking for where someone slighted you. You're looking for where that tornado came through, or we just had a massive hailstorm and I had flooding in my house. Like you're like, there it goes again. My life is never going to be good. I always am a magnet for problems, right? And so you find it and you manifest it. Whereas when you, Yogi, were like, I've caught up. I am there. I've done this. And then you start looking around and you see confirmation of it. Someone literally pats you on the back. Well done. Right? Something good happens. And so you start finding more and more of that in your world and you start believing in it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's a big switch in purple threads of saying, no, that's a lie. That is a lie. You don't live in my heart. You don't live in my head. You don't live in my spirit. I'm not looking for you anymore. I deserve to thrive. I deserve goodness around me. I deserve to excel. I deserve to be healthy. I deserve all those things that I for so long thought were out of my reach. And then do the work.
The work is the hardest part, following up with yourself. We tend to follow up with others, but our problem is actually following up with ourselves sometimes, right? So really doing that work is that follow-up. I wanted to shift it over to the acronym TRUST. Can you explain to our listeners what trust means and why that is such an important philosophy?
Oh, I love it. Thank you for asking that question. So when you've been betrayed, you've been through trauma, you've been violated, you've been whatever, trust is really hard to have. Trust in other people or trust in yourself. Why didn't I see that coming? I should have known better. How could I have avoided it? You put a lot of the onus on yourself, especially for children who've come through trauma. You feel like you're at fault because you're brainwashed into believing that you're at fault. So to me, how do you learn how to have trust? How do you recognize it? Because if you grow up with it, or you had bosses, or you had a coach, or you had someone in your religious organization, or you had a family member or somebody who betrayed your trust, right? How do you then know what good trust is? Who do you trust? Because I trusted way too many people, right? So I came up with the acronym of TRUST, which stands for truth, respect, unity, safety, and transparency. Those are what I live by, and those are what I expect for other people. And it's quick, it's really easy, like fact check. I used to let, like my ex-husband would talk circles around me. It wasn't truth. It wasn't truth. It was circles. And they were like, well, you wouldn't understand, and you're dyslexic, and da da da, and this and that. And I put this here and lol. So the truth is always sneaky, right? The actions don't match the words. Now it's easy to see if someone's being truthful or not. I don't care if they're leaning over in your face and it's someone you should be able to trust. You can spot a lie pretty easily now because I know what I'm looking for. I didn't before. So always speaking truth, right? And I'm a tough love kind of coach. And I think that's important. You know where I stand. And then respect. You can have opposite opinions on things, right? You can be polar ends, an opposite of each other, but you can speak with trust. You can respect, rather. You can speak kindly. And then the other letters, and transparency seems to be the hardest for most people because we can feel weak or vulnerable or less than. Like, hey guys, I'm kind of nervous doing this, right? Most people don't want to be that transparent. And what do you guys want to do? You want to build, if you're good people, you want to build trust. Hey, what can we do to help? How can we make it better? That shows me that you really authentically care, versus if you guys turn around and start making fun of me and like, well, you won't look like too much of an idiot, you know, or something like that. That's how you build trust. And it's steps, and it's by time, and it's history, and it's repeated. It's over and over. Is it consistently speaking in truth, respect, unity, safety, and transparency? And that's how we know who we can trust.
And I love the fact that you added there the consistency, because to me, that's the most important part. Because anybody can tell you one thing today, and then you see their actions. One of my biggest mentors, his name is Ray Ogoy. He's currently serving in Japan. I love that guy. He taught me that. He's like, hey man, I don't care what you do today. I don't care what your reputation says. I don't care what anyone else thinks about you. I will make my own decision by seeing you consistency in doing everything. And that blew my mind, and it taught me a lot of things. I wanted to ask you, what was your COVID timeline? How did you cope with that, and how did you teach organizations cope with that timeline?
Well, talk about having to pull purple threads. I have learned to embrace technology, right? It's not that I'm bad at technology. It's not that technology is smarter than me. It's not any of those things. I have learned to embrace it. So very quickly on, I realized that we are not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And being self-employed and paying my mortgage and all of the things that you do, I knew that was what worked before is not going to work. So you guys talk about adapt, overcome, right? So as a single parent, I learned to pivot. I learned to read warning signs coming up, like, ooh, father's mad, she's angry, walk on eggshells. What can I do? How can I pivot? How can I think differently? One of the benefits of having my dyslexic brain is it's very creative. And it's like, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? One of the challenges of it, if you're trying to continue one thought, you can have 5 different sentences going in 5 different directions. Chris is giving me a look like, yeah, I know that one. And my kids would say, oh, pretty bird, squirrel. And I'm like, okay, let me breathe. Let me slow down. Let me make a concise thought, because I'll start a thought and then end a different thought and sandwich it together. And if you know me, you can track. But if you don't, then yeah, right, Yogi?
Yeah, you know, I suffer from the same thing. I start talking, then all of a sudden I'm like in another conversation, and then over here I'm in this conversation, and then my wife's like looking at me, or someone that's like, hey, like, which topic are we talking about here? And I don't even notice it. Okay, Yogi, you can point at yourself all you want. I understand where I'm coming from. That's all that matters to me.
Yeah.
But going back a little bit to what you were talking about embracing the technology and going
Oh,
through that portion of it, how did you go through not being able to go and still fulfill the mission that you're going through? What did you do to move forward on that path?
that was a very kind save, Yogi. Thank you.
Yogi to the rescue.
So to adapt, what I decided was you have to build new curriculum. You have to reinvent yourself. You have to figure out what is the problem now? How do I solve the problem now? Who do I know that is a like-minded? Who would care about my mission? Who can I serve? Who is also looking for it? So I got on the phone. I hustled, man. I worked. I've always been a really hard worker. And so I found an organization, a lady who was like, we are drawing on the vine and we need unique content. I'm like, I got it. Let me talk. And we talked about isolation at home. We talked about how that is lonely and depression. And those are some of the steps on the adverse spiral and what can we do to prevent it? We talked about how I ran my first company remotely from my home before it was okay to have kids at home while you were working. We talked about ways to connect and have unity with other people when you're not physically with them. How do you do that? My kids are deployed. How do I stay connected? How do I communicate with them? Especially you were saying Japan. My son was in Japan. My son was in all these other countries, right? Like, how do you do the time difference? Like, so I talked about logical ways and like, it's okay to be lonely. That's okay. You're normal. You're human. Like, good on you. And how can we do healthy habits? So I built different programs and they actually kind of took off. So like the USDA hired me to do remote programming for their emerging women leaders. They were all challenged in some physical or mental capacity. Disabled is another way of saying that. And I built a program based on that. So I really worked in trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about. And then people started coming around. So like the sexual harassment prevention class that I taught to the Navy, they were like, yeah, they didn't buy it at first that I could do it via Zoom. They're like, no one's going to open up. And I said, you guys said no one was going to open up in person. And I made that happen over and over again, where people were sending their entire team to the program. Don't tell me I can't do this, right? Like that's a good go fight win motivator. So that's how I just was consistently myself, and I just called a lot of people and built a lot of different programs to fit the need at the time. And people knew they could count on me to come through.
So when you, because you just mentioned some of the sexual assault prevention stuff that you did for the Navy, what else have you done for military service members as far as navigating life transition and also building resiliency? What kind of work have you done?
Yeah, well, I love both of those. So transition, I'm a SOTF coach, so Special Operator Transition Foundation. I'm phase 1 coach, and they call it an executive coach, but I take active duty operators and I work on storytelling. I talk about mindset, the things we'll talk about here in just a bit, like how to get your mindset done, because the transition is huge and that means there's huge hurdles. And a lot of people don't transition well. There's a lot of loneliness. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of self-medication. There's a lot of falling apart of families, all the things that I talk about and want to prevent. Suicide rates go up. So I talk about those. I talk about their storytelling. It's really hard when you're a brief, like an intel briefer, and you have to now go into storytelling interviewing. And it's a huge jump in being able to articulate yourself and say things in a way that highlights you. And again, that kind of ties back to the worthiness, right? Well, no, I was just this, or my team did that. Like, so it's a mindset. I work a lot on mindset, being super aware of what we have going on cognitively through our brain and in our day, because it drives our behavior. I call it think, say, do. What you think is what you say, and what you say becomes what you do. So how do we rewire those? So that's transition. I do a lot of work on transition in those ways. And then I think the first part of that was about the adverse spiral. Is that right?
Yeah. So once you get to a certain point in your transition, right? Or really not just transition, but anywhere, like if you get into a certain point where you're in that downward spiral, it's really hard to come out of it because you're just spinning and spinning and spinning. And, the further you go down the spiral, the faster you go. So having these resources out there, like you're talking about, to help you kind of focus on like you got to focus on your stuff and, the substance abuse and stuff like that. Like there's all these services out there that are just phenomenal, but most of us just don't know about it. Like
Yeah.
the Thrive, what you've built, and Reboot. I'm not sure if you heard our Reboot episode. National Veterans Transition Services. They have great programs out there for veterans that can really help them get away from that downward spiral, that gap that Maurice Wilson, our mentor, has talked endlessly to us about. And now we're very aware of that gap. But there's a lot of people that don't even take that gap in consideration for whenever they go into the transition. It's not just the job gap, it's the whole entire emotional roller coaster, the mental mentality. And really, when you talked about mindset, I'd love to hear more on how you get into that right mindset before you get into a transition.
Yeah, I think the first step on great questions and great points, like especially so it had to make sense. So I put together the adverse spiral. And the first step is self-awareness, which is my Purple Threads curriculum. And the definition of purple threads, purple, because it's the color of courage, and it takes courage to look within. And PT, like you guys know PT. So it's purple threads is limiting personal thoughts connected to past traumas that physiologically are tied to what you think, say, and do. When we know our purple threads, we can have power and control over them, and we can remove them, right? We can say no more, or that was a lie, or hurt people. That's why they kept telling me that. Yes, I was that, and I don't have to be that anymore. Right. So when I'm working with people, I have a program called the Phoenix program that works with incarcerated. Like just because you were there doesn't mean you have to stay there. Right. Again, no victim thinking, and you're going to get out. You need to be a productive member of society. So how do we recognize and remove purple threads? Because it's not in your DNA. It's in your thoughts. Thoughts can change. We have power and control over our thoughts. And so that is actually part of the adverse spiral. And most people don't know that we really can control our thoughts. And it takes a lot of mental discipline. But military is really good on discipline. You guys are really good about mental toughness and skills and holding the line and training and following your training, right? And so when you can realize you can have that in your mindset and your thoughts, that is powerful. And so the adverse spiral, if we can find out where we are through self-awareness of purple threads, the first step is stress. And because we don't know where stress lives in our thoughts or lives in our body in a cellular level and how those warnings come out, then we slip right off that into purple threads. And purple threads is, I'm not good enough. I am not worthy. I am not handsome enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. All of those things. No one wants to look at those because we really believe them to be truth. These are not doubts. These are truths about ourselves. So we slip to the next step, which is depression, right? And no one, because you feel depressed. You're like, I'm a loser. I have no other job. I'm transitioning out. I have no other skills, right? All of these negative, toxic thoughts that build up in our head. And then we start seeing it around us. I'm getting ghosted. I'm not getting phone calls returned. The money is flying out. My wife is mad at me. My husband is like all up in arms because the income isn't coming in. Like, why are you here all the time? Like, go away. You used to deploy. You used to be gone. Now you're in my kitchen all the time, right? Things like that. And so we self-medicate. And that step is addiction. And we either want to numb out and not feel anything, or we are feeling so depressed and numb. We want to feel something, a zing, a zap, a bing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when that doesn't work, we fall into abuse because we bring it home, we bring it into our relationships, we fall then into PTS, and we fall down to the bottom of suicide. And nobody thinks they're ever going to be at the bottom. Nobody thinks they're going to go from what I say, hero to zero feeling, and especially zoom that fast. Well, the more purple threads you have and unresolved trauma, and the more you don't know where you are on this, you're not catching yourself drinking every single night. You're not catching yourself risky behavior, riding a motorcycle in the rain without the headlight on, right? You think you're crazy. You think you deserve this. You think whatever. It's a fast spiral down. And because that makes you feel even more unworthy to be at the bottom. You're more of a burden to other people. You're more of a disgrace to yourself. These are the thoughts that you have, and you just want the pain to end, and you don't want to be a pain to anybody else. And that's, in my opinion, what I hear over and over, and what my research shows. The key to this is it's a staircase. It's a staircase. We can climb back up. It's okay. We're going to be somewhere on that staircase at some point in time, right? You have a parent that dies, you lose your job, like a couple big hits, you come home from a trip and you find your house is flooded, the house that you spent your whole life rebuilding and modeling, and then the client falls through. A best friend does something really like, man, it doesn't take a lot of different things, especially during COVID. Like, and so that's why I tell people, have grace and space is the first key to that. And then there's 2 other keys to the adverse spiral. But the main thing is know where you are on there and give yourself grace and space. Like, it's okay. It's okay. And now I'm going to stop here and I'm going to start climbing up, and I'm going to climb up with resources.
That is beautiful. A lot of us, especially in the military, especially after being in for such a long time, we get indoctrinated, right? And we become institutionalized. And it's, as much as we try, and we have come leaps and bounds from where we were at 20 years ago, it's still a very tabooish thing to talk about suicide ideations or depression or anything like that. It is very difficult. And you bringing this out there and saying, hey, it's okay, it's valid what you feel, but you don't have to focus on that and keep on going it down. It's focus, identify it, and yes, give it some time to be alive, but now let's move forward. What we, on the other hand, that we're not trained to do, what we usually do is, oh, don't worry about it, that's not a big deal. Or, hey, tough it out, man. Or sailor, Marine, Air Force, whatever. And what we don't know, and we see the change, right? We see this change in the person and we think, oh, it'll be all right, they'll tough it up eventually. But we don't see that we're creating more damage, and what we're actually doing is, instead of allowing them to get it all out of their chest and move forward with life, they're just repressing it. And what happens, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, but what happens with that is, instead of repressing it, when you compress it all so much, it's like a pressure cooker. It's eventually gonna have to let out pressure one way or another. Most of the time, what we do, we just push it all the way inside, and the next time that we try to open it up, it just blows up in our face, right? So everything that you're mentioning is beautifully said. Thank you so much. I mean, something I want to mention is your involvement with the Wounded Warrior, the Navy, the Air Force, and so many other organizations that you've been doing, and it's fantastic, and we truly appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, it's my honor. And I did not serve. And so for me to be able to serve this way, people who, I stood there and watched both my kids raise their hand and take the oath. I'm telling you, as a parent, you want to work on not choking up, because they're walking out that door and they're gone. They're gone. They're going to boot camp, and you're not going to see them again. So the last thing I don't want them to see is a mom over there who's crying, like, don't go, child. I'm like strong. I'm proud. I'm like, I love you. I'm proud of you. Now go knock the socks off them. Like, go do it. Like that kind of mentality. And having been, it's hard what you guys have done just from an outside parent perspective and watching it. It's really admirable. And I love that I can talk in a tough love kind of way. And so you were talking about putting more, and so finger pointing language is part of the adverse spiral. So the shame, blame, and judgment creates more isolation, creates more of that pressure, more of the purple threads, more of that downward spiral. So you should have known better. What's your problem? Why didn't you call me? Hey, you had a flood. That's what friends are for. Why didn't you call me? Because I'm a strong, independent woman, and I don't, so you're putting more shame on me versus I would love to help. How can I be there? Or that's hard. Or being able to change language, because one of the things that most of us are taught that we can recognize depression or suicidal ideations in somebody else, right? They're going to start giving away their possessions. They're going to start talking about death. They're going to start self-isolating. That's not always the case. And in the military, as you were saying, my pseudo son-in-law that I love and adore, he lost so many guys after deployments because they came home and their structure wasn't there. They didn't have belonging. It wasn't because of what happened in war. It was what happened when they came home and they didn't have the love and the support, and they did have people walking out on them, and they did have the shame and the blame, and they did have, what's your problem? You're drinking too much. You're losing it, versus what I try to teach is how do you change the language? So how do you change the language so that you can say things? Because I'm not about to say, I feel weak. Hey guys, can you come and help me? Because I can't do this on my own. I didn't get to where I am by having that mindset, right? But it's also my Achilles heel, because I don't reach out very easily. I have to consciously be aware that I'm not doing it. So one of the things I teach is based on the location. So Air Force, let's say I talk to cadets. I've taught there a bunch of different times. I taught about changing the language so that they can understand each other. And so instead of saying, I feel suicidal, or instead of saying, I feel, that, they can say, I'm lost in the clouds. That's what they came up with. I'm like, I love that. I'm lost in the clouds. So you can have the conversation without having the conversation with any kind of shame and blame attached to it. So find the language with your people that you can express. And I also talk Yogi about having 3 people that you can go to for anything. So if you're an island and you're starting to burn down, you need to have 3 exits, 3 bridges off the island. And those bridges are built over time with a firm foundation, with maintenance, and they also go both ways. So what that means is I can't just call on you, hey, Chris, guess what? I haven't talked to you in 4 years, but I've got a problem. Can you drop everything and come here, right? We're checking in on each other. We're seeing each other. We understand each other's lives. And those are the people, you need at least 3 people in your life. And one of the reasons why I picked 3 is I do a lot of things in 3, but let's say your best friend's deployed. Well, you can't get a hold of them, so that's not going to work. Let's say you're stressed out about finances and that's what you and your spouse are fighting about. So it can't be your spouse you're going to, because that's part of the problem. So you need 3 different ways off the island if the island is burning down. And that is one of the top 3 things to prevent the adverse spiral, is make sure you have 3 really good, strong bridges that you can go to and saying, I don't feel like myself. I think I'm crashing and burning. I'm in the clouds. I could use some support.
And you bring up some amazing, like, in the clouds. I love that. And then the 3 ways off the island. How can storytelling be therapeutic in people's recovery and road to greater things?
I love it. Storytelling connects us and unites us, and we see each other in the storytelling. Like Yogi, I can instantly connect with you on different reasons. I didn't grow up in Mexico. I've been to Mexico, but I didn't grow up there. But like a parent that left, like that makes me think about my kids and how did they react? Like you were in the Navy. I have lots of friends that are in Navy, right? Like there's these things of connection. And when we have connection to one another, we can see ourselves. And when we can see ourselves from a distance, we tend to be hard on ourselves, overachievers, alpha dogs, perfectionists, or the other end of that, I'm never going to be good enough. I'm never going to be smart. Why even bother trying? We can see ourselves through other people's stories, and we can find connections, and we can find empathy for other people. Like, oh, please don't be hard on yourself. Like, you did a great job. And then we can turn around and be like, oh, I can hear it. I can hear it out loud. And this is what I want to have for myself. The same kind of self-compassion. That's what Purple Threads is about, is being able to recognize it and then give yourself what you really need. So being able to give those conversations to each other is important.
That 100%. And I love how your energy is just amazing. Like everything that you're talking about, I'm really excited to have our listeners like get in touch with you and stuff like that. But I think we should move on to the final rounds and say the save rounds and alibis. Does anyone have any save rounds or alibis? All right, cool. We're going to go into the final questions. All right, so my favorite question, because it's all about what you surround yourself with. So what you watch, what you listen. So this is one of my favorite questions because I firmly believe that you should be listening to books that are going to help you become better at your craft, better in your passions. So what books or podcasts have helped you on your journey?
Like lots and lots and lots. PTS, I call it PTS because I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's an absolute normal response to abnormal situations. And I think the more we put heavy language on something, the harder it is to raise your hand and say, yeah, that's me. Right. So on PTS, there's some podcasts. Jonathan Sheridan, Normalized PTSD. He does amazing work. I love some of his work. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I even just read, I love LinkedIn, and I connected with Don Bentley, and he just wrote Forgotten War, and he is a famous like author and has all these different books out there, and just reading it, I got a call from my son saying, you won't hear from me. And that was right before the Abby Gates at the airport at Kabul. And then I didn't hear after the Marines were killed and 13 service members were killed, and I didn't hear. The book is based on that timeline. It's like a Tom Clancy type of like book, but it had a lot about understanding military and special operators. And because I work with special operators, I can learn little pieces of information through something that's historic, something that's not. But they talk about that whole timeline, and he dedicates the book to the service members that we lost. And being a mom at that time, I can tap into the feelings I had when I didn't hear from my son for many days in a row and afraid to leave the house, mainly because I was afraid to come home and see that car in my driveway. So I get like, even now, like he's totally fine. But that connection to other people helps me do my work. It helps me have empathy and kindness for Gold Star families. It helps me understand Blue Star families. It helps me understand from the deployed perspective. People have said I help them understand what their family felt like. So I think just exposing yourself to different podcasts. I also love the Leadership Podcast for a different reason. Jim Vasilopoulos and Jan Rutherford, they study leaders. They tend to study a lot of military leaders. And so, is that okay? All right. So I like getting a lot of different information. I've read Brene Brown's books. She's great about shame, addressing shame, daring greatly. But I really do pick up pieces of things that, so just try different things. One of my favorite things is to go to Sunday to the library and just walk around and pick different books that I would never have picked, and being exposed to other ideas.
Abby, normally I would be asking you, what advice would you give yourself before joining the Navy, or an 18-year-old self? But as a mother and as someone that deals with the military from both sides, inside and out, I'm going to ask you two questions. What advice would you give your son and your daughter before they join the military, now that you have experienced all this? And what advice would you give them before they start their transitioning out of the military?
Great questions. So I'm going to say a word. I'm going to laugh. Okay. The word is no. And when I say no, I don't mean the opposite of yes. I mean no. No in yourself. It's more than believe. Yeah. Believing, this kind of connection, heart, mind, body, soul, spirit, everything. No in yourself. And that is something I'm very proud. I parented with a lot of intent. I parented with reading a lot of different types of books. I parented with also listening to my own drumbeat, where some people were like, oh, you should be doing this, and oh, you should be doing that. And, you know, my kids struggled with dyslexia. I'm like, so did I. And I'm like, that's okay, but I'm going to teach them to walk without a crutch. And it was harder. You were talking about being delayed. You know, I had my kids, one kid held back a year, right? And that was hard. It was hard on the kid. It was hard on me. It was hard on everything. And I got them out of the school district and drove them every single day to and from a different school district, because they have better reading specialists at the school, better technology at that school. I had to fight to get my kids in that school because it was out of my zone. And when you do that and you tell the person, I know in you, I know you are brilliant, I know you will do well. My daughter ended up taking first place at boot camp, and she was like, Mom, you were right there by my side. And she ended up giving me, it was kind of an emotional story for me, but she gave me her Marine Corps graduation ring. And I was like, no. And she's like, you were in my ear. Every time I thought I couldn't do it, I could hear you being like, I know you can. Like, chase down one more person, get over one more wall, practice that information. You will pass this test. I know you will. I know it. And she did. And the long story about the ring is that she bought two. So she had got one for me with her birthstone, and then hers is my birthstone. And so that was before you joined. I know. And she's a tough cookie, you know what I mean? And so for her to admit that was tough. That was hard for her, but it was authentic. So she's like, you really knew in me. And then transition, my son is still active duty, but when my daughter, she came up with this, you know, and she was Presidential Helicopter Squadron. She was security, you know, she's no slouch. And when she was transitioning, she's like, there's nothing I can do. I'm not good for anything. I'm not trained for anything. You know, and I was like, stop right there. You have proven you're a winner. You know, you're a winner. So if I could help other people see that, because I hear a lot of it, well, what am I going to do on the outside? Know in yourself. Absolutely. 100% know in yourself.
I absolutely love that. And I just want to say, hey, like, thank you for being that mom.
Mhm.
Thank you for being that leader. And I grew up in a broken home environment with only a single parent. And I'm going to tell you right now, as a dad, I don't know how you did it. That is a very hard mission. And, you know, to all those military dependents that are listening, they are single parents while we're gone. And the things that you just said just kind of like really touched my heart. You know, I was that kid that was in special ed from like second grade all the way until I graduated. And I barely graduated, mind you. I didn't have that support system. And to hear, you know, what you did for your children is just amazing. And I'm not blaming anyone. It's just what I grew up with. And I honestly think the way I grew up made me the way I am today. So I'm appreciative of the tough path that I had, because hardness forms hard people. And it also informs people on how not to be in the future, right? So I really do appreciate you sharing that. That was amazing. And I love the birthstone thing. That I was for the people that didn't know, I was just sitting here going, oh, my heart. So I wanted to ask one more question, and this is geared towards mindset. And I love mindset. Mindset is key. How did you manage your mindset when you were doing your own personal transition from being a single mother to what you are today?
Yeah. And I think I have much more empathy, because it's an ugly beast. When you've poured your heart, your soul, your time, your energy, your resources, blood, sweat, tears into stopping some really, really awful cycles and trying to do the exact opposite, by yourself, and financially, emotionally, physically, spiritually, it is really hard. And yet it was easy because I had a mission. We had to take the hill. We had to take the hill. Right. And with them gone, I really understood transition from a different perspective of lack of purpose, lack of mission. The best is kind of behind me, and they moved on. So I talk about grief and loss, like when your teams move on without you, how does that feel? And then the grief of, did I do enough? I left. They needed me. They counted on me, right? Did I do enough? And then you replay scenarios, and and then you can't do that. You can't be a, what do they call that? Like a Monday morning quarterback. And so I think for me, when I talk about transition, I talk about grief and loss. I talk about mourning. I talk about role versus identity. I talk about how these things impact us, and we don't think it's going to, right? And it hits really hard, and that's okay. It's okay. It's going to hit really hard. You're going to have waves of emotion, especially in the military. And for me, it was very stoic in the way of not shoving it down, but stoic with, like, as in stoicism, of trying to teach my kids that it's okay. And here's how we rally the troops. And, I'd go into my room, close the door, go into the closet, sit on the floor, have a really good hard cry, wipe my tears, stand back up and be like, all right, kids, let's go. Like, we got this. And I think in the military, when people transition, all these waves of emotions come out because you're now allowed to feel a lot more. It's not mission sensitive. But what I hear is you're at a stoplight, and 1 minute you're smiling and happy, and the next stoplight you're ready to go choke the guy behind you because his truck is like right on your bumper, right? And and there's these wave of emotions because you're allowed to have them. And as a mom, I wasn't allowed to have them because I wanted to give my kids stability. I wanted to give them a calm, beautiful, safe, loving home that this is their safe haven. They can fall apart. They can do that here, but not their one and only parent. I couldn't have my own nervous breakdown, right? I couldn't have rages of anger because I didn't want them thinking that's how you handle life. And all those emotions are still inside of you, even though you've learned to suppress them, and they come out with gale force winds, and it's a lot. And I see you both nodding and smiling and everything. And it's a lot. And that's what we talk about in transition is like, and that's normal. And it's okay. You're not crazy. You're not losing it. It's totally a normal response, normal emotions whenever we go into transition. And I try to remind people in the adverse spiral, when you're going through a transition, that stress is at an all-time high. And so it's very easy to slip down that adverse spiral. So be kind to yourself. Know in yourself, know that you can get through this, and find the resources. Like you mentioned, the reboot, you guys, your podcast, there's tons of resources. I'm out there. They can contact me.
Speaking of how to contact you, what is the best way to contact you?
Well, you need to remember G, because if you don't have it, you get Peyton Manning's sister-in-law. So Abigail G, AbigailGManning.com.
Oh, I'm totally emailing that person right now.
And you have information on there. You'll have my contact. You have a contact form for us. That is probably the simplest way. If you're on LinkedIn, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm not very big on any other social media, but on LinkedIn, or find me on the website and send me a message. I have a free monthly newsletter with Think, Say, Do tips that we send out. I also have a community corner where we highlight usually military or veteran organizations and events that they're having. We'll be commenting about this program in there. So see a huge spike in your attendance. No, just kidding. But that would be the best way.
Oh yeah, it's been such a crazy journey. Thank you for just coming on here. And oh darn it, I stole the thunder from Yogi. Go ahead, Yogi. You got it.
Abby, we want to thank you for everything that you have been doing for basically your entire life. You spent 26 years fighting child abuse, then raising your children at the same time, being a single mother. And you didn't stop. Once you could have stopped, but there was nothing else going, right, pushing you, you chose to continue serving and find a way to help everyone that was in need. And that led you to help in the military, which this is how you ended up here with us. And we truly thank everything that you do. And we're fans of your work. We're absolute students of what you teach. And we can't help but be grateful to have someone like you that not only has survived a lot of hardship, you have become resilient. You taught your children to be resilient, and now you're teaching us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I hope that's all recorded because I want to listen to that 1,000 times.
Oh, it's recorded. Seriously, like before I try to steal Yogi's thunder, I was just like so excited to say thank you, because on so many different levels, like you have overcome so much just to become this amazing person. And I kind of touched on a little bit. You can't be who you are tomorrow without who you are yesterday and what you're doing to become that next person today.
Yeah.
You know, and you're just an epitome of all that, and that's amazing. And I'm so glad you came on here. And this goes to so many different things. Your whole entire program that you do. You're on TED Talks. You're all over the place because your message resonates with so many people in so many different areas. And I'm absolutely thrilled that you came on here and spent a little bit of your time and energy with us, and hopefully created something that's going to touch the audience that listens to this, because that's honestly what it's all about. It's about helping people transition and reintegrate and realize that they got to get their mindset right. And I'm really grateful for you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad this is recorded because I'll listen to that too. Thank you. Because it can be a very quiet, lonely when you talk to people about some of these hard things. I get a lot of pulled off to the side, a lot of things like that. But, you know, it's not something a lot of people openly like on social media, right? You know, I don't know why, but I'm trying to build that community where it's okay to say, hey, I have struggled, or I am struggling, and I want to be encouraged and empowered. And you both did that for me tonight. You both gave me more fuel for my fire. You gave me inspiration. And like I do, I know you do for all of your audiences. So thank you both for all that you have done for our country, and that all you're continuing to do for all of us. And you've lifted my spirit and taught me things tonight too. So thank you guys.
So you guys heard it. We had Abigail on here, and she's got a great message. Please contact her, look at her content. She's got some great messages out there. And this is for anybody that you know that might be struggling with pretty much anything. She's got it. So I want you guys to take a look at this. Now remember, it's not all rainbows and unicorns out there, and it is your transition. So take charge of it. Return to Roots out. Yes. Oh man, my goodness, my dog was like chewing on a rock over here. I'm like, seriously, dog. It's not like it's a puppy. You saw her. You saw
I
him,
did. I
right?
did it. My brain got sidetracked. I'm like, oh,
Like, puppy.
I'm like, that's my dog. I'm like, wait, we're recording. I don't know the
All right,
end.
so we're having technical difficulties.
I can see both of you and I can see typing. And so I'm like, oh.
He has transitioned over to being a mute. I'm not sure if you heard the reason why we both looked at you so funny is because I heard something in my ears while you were talking about the leadership podcast, and then it messed you up because we both looked at you. I'm like, what was that sound? I'm like, did you hear that? Like it said Bluetooth connected. I'm like,
Oh, I thought it was end of recording. I thought like it was something like that.
no,
No.
it was just
It was my microphone died, so I'm
Oh.
sorry.
Yeah,